This is Joe. I've worked with Joe. I think I've only worked with him twice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So last time I worked with him, we hated each other for quite a while until we found out that we could build the most beautiful test automation frameworks together. So Joe taught me a lot about API testing. He's a really fucking excellent developer, and he knows it as well. He's spoken before about Kubernetes and loads of cool stuff here, and you're going to enjoy it because it's Joe Stead. Joe fucking Stead. So enjoy Joe Stead.
So, no pressure, I guess. So, yeah, thanks everybody. As Gwen said, I am Joe, and I do think I'm a pretty good developer. I own a company called Very Good Software because we make software that is in fact very good. But I'm not here to talk about that today. I'm here to talk about testing in production around the world, which is kind of exciting, I think. Does anybody here, just as a show of hands, this is going to be interactive, by the way, so show of hands, does anybody actually test in production currently? When you worked at McDonald's? No, when you went to McDonald's. Checks on the bag and realising. Fair enough, so a couple of people. So before we get into it, I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory about why I'm talking about this. I like to talk from my own personal experience. I don't like to have an idea and kind of preach it unless I've tested it and actually think it's something worth sharing. So around this time last year, I was approached by a company in Switzerland. They're a startup, been going around for about 5 years or so now. They had no tech at the time. They brought in a CTO who I've worked with previously, and they wanted to bring tech in-house. So I got offered the role of VP engineering, which is pretty cool. They're based in Switzerland, but the exciting thing about them is they're around the world. So we have offices in the UK, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Australia. And this is, in fact, a map. You just can't see it. Sorry, everybody. So we have offices around the world, and that poses a few problems, especially for a company that isn't really a tech company. We are now, but we weren't back then, of how do we support people on the other side of the world. So one of the things, I should mention, by the way, it's a fintech company. So we work in finance, B2B lending, and each region has its own market with different laws about what you can and can't do. So one of the things that we face is we have a lot of documents and data and things like that we need to store somewhere. In the UK, we need to store them in the UK. In Australia, they want to store them in Australia for legal reasons and financial regulation reasons, all of that nonsense. If you're looking at the screen and thinking, what is this nonsense image? I've used AI to generate all of the images for this slide deck. It gets way crazier. So just embrace it. So these are financial legal document things, I think is what I told it to generate, and it did a pretty good job, I think. So we had all these documents, we needed to store them in a certain place, certain way, but I'm not in Australia. So how could I be in Australia without being in Australia? My first proposal was I spend 6 months in Australia during the summer months and 6 months in Europe during the summer months. That would have worked for half of the year, but again, the other half of the year I'm still not in Australia, so I can't support it. So that didn't work. I also thought, how is it possible to be there without being there? Again, I asked some AI, and it came up with this. I don't know what Suday and Sunday means, but who am I, a mere mortal, to disagree with the internet AI genius stuff? So it came up with this idea of being in Australia and London at the same time. Got really weird. It's not going to work. So it became pretty clear, well, yeah, also, I can't do it all anyway. I can't be a single-man team for a global organization. It doesn't work. So it became pretty clear to me that we need a team. Again, there's no tech at this point in the organization, right? So I've got a choice. I can build a kind of geolocated team around the world, or I can build a team centrally in one place. If you take a close-up at these bases, they're really messed up as well. Just a fun little thing there. Is a worldwide team a good idea as a starting point for a company that has no technology, no kind of established ways of working? Although it would be quite cool to build that team, I thought it would be a little bit too much. So I decided that a team in a single-ish time zone, so European time zone, obviously we're one behind most of Central Europe. And then once we build that team, what do they need to be able to do to support Australia? Because we've still got that problem. We've got this market in a completely different part of the world, different time zone, different things. So we have this team. So what sort of things do they need to be able to support the other side of the world? So I came up with some general things that I wanted the team to do anyway. I wanted them to be able to release multiple times a day, Releasing shouldn't be a big scary thing. It should be something we're doing all the time and it's normal as part of our workflow. I want every commit to the main branch to go to production. It shouldn't be a big ceremony. Once it's in main, it gets shipped, it goes live. Yeah? And finally, the team is responsible for building and running this thing. So I've built a team in Europe, and I'm saying, you're responsible for stuff running in Australia, by the way. So if it goes wrong, you need to get out of bed and fix it. Surprisingly, it goes wrong very rarely. It turns out, if you want to have resilient software, build a team on the other side of the world, because nobody likes sitting up in the middle of the night. It's great. But how does this really solve the Australia problem, other than, well, nobody wants to get up at night, unless, do people like being on, is anybody here on call at any point, by the way? Yeah, do you like getting up in the middle of the night and fixing production issues? No, okay, just thought I'd check that, because you never know. So how does this solve the Australia problem? Well, we can run the exact same software in every part of the world. That's relatively easy, you can copy and paste it, and it works. We can trust that blindly, right? No. What if we deploy the exact same software around the world at the exact same time? So instead of having a Europe or a London deployment, a Frankfurt deployment, a Sydney deployment, what if we do them all at once and it's just a single deployment? That gives us a little bit more confidence that the pipeline is at least working. And what if we have all of our infrastructure that's running this software configured in the exact same way as well? So instead of having a server that's sitting in Australia that somebody's kind of gone into and changed some settings, and a server that's sitting in Europe that somebody's gone into and changed some settings, and there's difference, there's drifts, what if they're exactly the same? Okay, so we've got the exact same software, the exact same infrastructure configuration anywhere in the world. Can we make that work? Well, this is the bit where it gets interesting, because I'm going to try and do a live example. So what I'm going to do is deploy something to AWS that's the same code in multiple regions. So I'm going to do London and Sydney. If this works, great. If it doesn't, let's just pretend it did. So let me just prepare this if I can. The cool thing is now is I can't see what's on the screen. So, oh. Yeah, and nothing's on the screen, so I can't move it over. There we go. Now, where is it? Can anybody see presentation mode anywhere? No, nor can I. Oh. Yeah, thank you. Oh, I didn't read. Oh, there we go. Okay, right. So, bit technical. Is anybody here doing any test automation currently? Cool. Actually, quite a few of you. Good. Excellent. So this is infrastructure as code. It's all a bit. Oh, this is really annoying. It's all a bit nonsense. But this is essentially just a Node.js program. Okay, you can write this in Python. You can write this in .NET. You can write this in some other stuff too, Java as well. So what we're doing is we're going to define something for London in EUS2, which is an AWS region, and in Australia for Asia Pacific Southeast 2, which is in Sydney. And all we're going to do is deploy a Lambda that says, I'm running in this region for this tenant name thing. Okay? And that's all it does right now, plus some other stuff that I'm not actually going to show you. Sorry, this is really awkward. Nope. Might save my back a little bit here. Right, so all I'm going to do briefly is just run this program. And again, it's just a Node.js program. This, for those who are wondering, is using a tool called Pulumi. Is anybody familiar with Terraform? Yeah. Anybody familiar with Pulumi? No. Okay, so Pulumi and Terraform are kind of similar. The difference is I'm able to write Node.js, .NET, Java, rather than HCL. So this is just a Node.js program. It's creating some stuff for me in the background. It's creating all of my... sometimes it is, but for all intents and purposes, no. Yeah. So that's creating some stuff in the background. What I'm going to do whilst this is happening is... find my slide deck again. Okay, and then if I go here, right, okay, so this is the AWS console. I'm just going to refresh this, and we will see that there's nothing to display. That's a good start. Okay, we can see that we've got the London handler there because we're in, if you can see it very briefly, in the London region of the AWS console. Can people over there see it as well? Good. And we can also see that we're in, if I go to Asia Pacific Southeast 2, and it loads. We can see we've got the Australia handler there too. Now, does anybody believe me that this works?
No.
Why?
Well, you said, but you didn't really show us what it looked like before.
Well, it was empty before. So nobody believes me that this is working, that my excellent software is working flawlessly in 2 regions at the same time?
Prove it.
Thank you. So I'm just going to go back to the code now. Does anyone know where my mouse is? No. Right, I'm just going to go back to the code, and then I'm going to go to some tests. And again, this is really small. I'm really sorry. Let's try presentation mode again. Cool, right, okay. So I've got a couple of automated tests here. Again, it's just Node.js, a standard test that you can write anywhere. You can write this in any language you're familiar with, and if you're not familiar with any languages, you can't do it. so all we're doing essentially is we're creating a couple of Lambda clients in the AWS side of things. And what that is going to do is allow us to talk to the Lambdas we've just deployed. So for those who don't know, in AWS, a Lambda is just an on-demand function that runs your code on demand. So what I expect to come back is for one of the tests, the London handler, to be running in the EU West 2 region for tenant name London. Okay, and then I've also got the Australia one running in AP Southeast 2 for tenant Australia. Okay. So I've just done the deployment. Let's pretend for a second I'm a deployment or a pipeline that's shipping my code through. I've just done a deployment to AWS. The next thing I'm going to do is just run some tests to validate that it's worked. So let's run this one first. And it's kind of at the bottom. I feel like I'm in the way a bit. Sort of at the bottom here, running now, taking its time. It's tethering from my phone, by the way. So there we go. That's gone green. So do you believe me that it's working now? Well, it has 0 input and produces output when it's invoked. So, it's running for London. Is it running in Australia? Can't tell. All right, let's run them all. Run the entire file. So, my original demo for this was going to be my actual live software at work, but there's some legal things that means I can't show that to you. Okay, so I've got 2 tests that have passed now. Now do you believe me it's running? Sort of. What more can I do to convince you that it's running?
Some feedback.
Well, you've got a test. Okay, well, let's do some manual testing too. Let's do some manual testing too. So we're going to be... So we'll do the Australian one because that happens to be the Persian one. And let's just run it, yeah? There's even a tab here called test. That's convenient, isn't it? Let's just hit the test button. It's taking its time. Succeeded. Believe me now.
Do we look at the monitor tab?
Sure. I mean, the metrics will take a second to come through, especially because I'm in Australia. See, no errors. No data at all. That's because CloudWatch takes like 5 minutes to actually propagate that information through. So we can see here that the output is running in AP Southeast 2 for tenant Australia. Is my code doing what I want it to do? And have I proved that? You can tell I'm in a room full of testers. What more proof would people see? I've shown it manually, I've shown it automatically. What else can I do?
You could hit it.
I just did. So no, because I've not, for the purpose of this demo, I've not deployed like an API or anything that I can go to. Yeah, sorry. Cool. I've just opened Slack by accident. That's going to be fun. Say again, sorry?
Can you hit it 10,000 times?
No, because that's my own AWS account. Right.
Can you change the expected so we know your test don't say no class?
That's the first sensible thing somebody said. Well done. I'll do it in a second. So, London and Australia have the exact same software deployed. Do we all agree on that at least?
Yeah.
Right? And we know that it's working in both locations because I've proved it. I'll break the test in a second. So we know it's working in both locations. Do we all agree on that? There's some people saying no. What do I need to do to prove to you that it's working in both London and Australia? Make what, sorry? Local time. Yeah, that's a bit difficult because the time will be UTC no matter where it's running. So, yeah. But okay, somebody did come up with a pretty decent suggestion of breaking the test. So, okay. Because, as you all know, never trust a test that you've never seen fail. Everybody knows that, right? Yeah, unless I've written it, in which case it's guaranteed to work. So let's change this to EU West 3 and 3. These aren't real reasons, by the way. And let's run it all again. It's taking its time. So, two have failed. So now do you believe me that it's running in Australia and London and doing the exact same thing?
Yeah.
Excellent. It's always fun doing this in front of a room full of testers who are naturally going to be skeptical. So, it's working in London and it's working in Sydney. And this is probably my favourite image that the AI has generated. It's a computer that works in London, but not in Sydney. Like, honestly, this stuff is crazy. Yeah, who needs artists? Is anybody here like an artist or dabbles in art? Good, because you're redundant. But there are still differences between Australia and London, right?
Yeah.
So AWS in Australia may do things differently. There may not be all the services that we need there. It's literally on the other side of the world. There's environmental factors. I once worked for a company where somebody said, what if a plane crashes into all of the data centers at once? We're all going to die, probably, if that's the case. That is literally the end of the world. Don't worry for that scenario. Obviously, disaster planning is good. That's too far. But there are differences between Australia and London. So we need to take that into account, that we can't just blindly trust that just because it's working in London, it's going to work exactly the same in Australia. The other thing is, how can I have confidence that what's running in Australia is going to continue to run without changing live data? So I mentioned before I work for a financial services company. What I can't do is just start putting in test data into the production system, because some people are going to be expecting very big bonuses, or we're going to be in a really bad situation where our risk is far too high and people are going to panic. I can't just go changing production data in Australia, right? So how do I make it so I can test what's in Australia in a European time zone where I am, have confidence that it's working, and not break their stuff there as well? Is everybody with me with this?
Different tenants, like a test tenant and a production tenant.
Yeah, have you come to one of my talks before? You've come to one of my talks before, I think. So let's see how that might look. So for the sake of this, I'll just fix these back. So for the sake of this, I'm going to cheat in that I'm going to run everything in London. And the reason for that is because I wrote this part of the demo just before lunch. But what I'm going to do now is, I mentioned previously, I've got a legal requirement to store documents in Sydney for Australia, in London for London and other locations. There's a legal requirement there. FCA and the local regulators and things like that want you to do that. Okay? So what I'm going to do is find my mouse again and go to a different file and blindly copy and paste this code that I wrote earlier. to this. Overwrite this. And go back to presentation mode. Okay. So now what I've done is I'm going to have the concept of two tenants. I'm going to have a London tenant and a UK test tenant. They're both deploying to EU West 2. For argument's sake, this could be Asia Pacific as well. In fact, in the real world, this would be Asia Pacific as well. It would do lots of things. What I did before is I deployed a Lambda, which is the compute, the thing that makes all the decisions and stuff, to both regions. Whereas actually, because in this instance they're both in EU West 2, I don't need to do that. I can just do it to one. What I do in reality is deploy a Lambda or some compute to each region that I want to run in. And then the storage, the thing that I legally have to keep separate, would also be separate on a per tenant basis. So in this instance, what I'm doing here is I have a function that just exists on its own. And then for each of the tenants I have, I'm provisioning an S3 bucket. And then S3 is storage, by the way. And then basically when your file lands into that storage thing, it's going to trigger the Lambda. Okay? So let's run this now by finding the run button in presentation mode with my neck twisting around. Let's just run that. And this is going to take a couple of minutes to run because it's going to destroy what we already had there because it's infrastructure as code, so it's just stateful. That's what we want. That's how we trust that it's the same. And it's going to create some new stuff. So what it's going to do now is it's going to create a single Lambda in EU West 2, London, and it's going to create an S3 bucket in also EU West 2, and another S3 bucket in EU West 2 that's going to have a trigger to that Lambda. I haven't written any automated tests around this because, again, I wrote this just before lunch, this bit of the demo. So you're going to have to trust me that we could write automated tests around this. I just haven't done it. Do I have everybody's trust?
No.
Tough. I'm not going to write it live, so.
We're all going to stay here until you write those tests.
I could, except I've just deleted everything that was there, so I can't.
How would you do this with no downtime?
So because I'm fundamentally changing what's there, the downtime's sort of inevitable, you could do a blue-green type thing, or you could have a different stack. But normally, you would have additive infrastructure and additive changes, which would result in no downtime. So in fact, I can show you that after this is run, I'll add another bucket in or whatever, and there'll be no downtime for that. So this takes a little while, but while that's running, let's go blindly refreshing the AWS console to see what it's done. There are better ways of doing it, but this is just more fun and engaging for me. And it hurts my neck a bit as well. Right, so if I go to here and we refresh this now, at some point this is going to disappear. There we go. Australia's gone. But if we go back to EU West 2, wherever that is, London, you can see here, I've still got the London handler, that will disappear, but 30 seconds ago, this compute handler showed up as well. And if I just invoke this from the console, test now, succeeded. The output's a bit different running in EU West 2, because this isn't running for a particular tenant in this concept anymore. It's just one compute handler that's shared across everywhere, right? And then if we look at the storage real quick, and we order by creation date, which we are. So we have a UK test bucket and a London with some suffix bucket created just now. So this is actually what we do in my current role. We have compute for a region that's there that we can test and do whatever we want with our test data. And then storage, so in this instance it's S3, which is like a file system. It could be a SQL database, it could be a NoSQL database, it could be whatever, would be per tenant, allowing me to test the compute, the thing that's doing all the thinking. In production, it's exactly the same as what they're using for real in Australia without affecting them. Does that make sense to people? Yeah, and would you have confidence that your compute, the thing that does all the heavy lifting, is working without affecting the live production data? Yeah? Cool. And I think if we look into this as well, depending on if I can remember how to use the console, because I rarely use it. somewhere in here there'll be a triggery thing. I don't know where. Yeah, anyway, it'll be in there somewhere. So, you may be thinking at this point, I work in Leeds. We don't have offices in Australia. How does this apply to me? What's the takeaway of this for me? Well, I think the primary takeaway from this talk is AI generates really creepy images. So you've got that to take home with you. So you've all got something at the very least. And the second thing is, you kind of remove all of the differences between a test environment and a prod environment when you do your testing in prod. Now, I'm not saying blindly ship everything to prod and just do all of your testing there. I think you can do that. It's definitely possible. You need a really mature team to be able to do that. You have to use things like feature flags quite a lot and things like that. But if you're able to remove any environmental differences between a test environment, a staging environment, a UAT environment, whatever you want to call it, or all of them in some instances, in which case you're spending too much, you don't need that many, and just do your testing in production, you should have way more confidence that what you've shipped to production is what you want it to be. It's running the same code. You've got tests against it. Those tests that I was running, I could run those on a schedule. I can run those every 5 minutes if I want and just make sure that everything's still alive. I probably wouldn't, but I could. And if they ever fail, I could generate an alert to let the team know something has broken here, by the way. What I would certainly do as part of my pipeline is make sure that those tests are running straight after a deployment as a sanity check. And if it hasn't, I'd want a rollback process or something like that to make sure I've not broken anything. Certainly want that. But we could also run those on a schedule. Thanks. I think we've got maybe a minute for any questions. If not, I'm sticking around all day. Yeah.
So if you've got a production app and you've got a test app that you're deploying,
Yep.
do you run the risk of the underlying library that I'm going to be using for those functions that deploy it everywhere? Running out kind of like 6, so maybe production's like a couple of versions behind or switching through or something.
So that's definitely a concern. But what we saw at the very end there is there's a single app, a single Lambda, which would essentially serve your test and your production tenants. So that single Lambda would handle both requests. You'd have some logic inside there to detect what database connector and things like that. We tend to use HTTP headers to handle that, to let you know the tenant that's running. What I also showed in the code as well was like a little hard-coded list of tenants. You could also put those in a database of some kind because it was just code that was running, right? Read them out so you can deploy new tenants on the fly, which is also something we do, which is pretty cool, I think. Any other questions?
So even if you're in a test tenant and things go wrong, I think there's a way to reset. You can create that tenant back, right?
Well, yeah, test tenant, I mean, you're running in production, so if something goes wrong, you kind of want to get that fixed pretty quickly anyway. But yeah, if you end up corrupting the data, for example, it doesn't really matter, because you can either just recreate the tenant altogether from scratch, or just throw it away, create a new one, whatever. It doesn't really matter, because it's not impacting the operation of the business in any way. It's just you're losing out on the competence that you need to support these things. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. But in my company, the data is created quite manually.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm kind of going to it. Like, you should be automated way of resetting the data rather than
Absolutely.
spend time manually creating. You don't want it to be corrupted.
Absolutely. You may end up as part of your test having something that seeds the tenant into getting into a state that you want, so you can test things. But obviously that depends on what you're doing. Some stuff you can test with no data, some you'll need loads. Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody.